All right, so welcome everyone to our September 2022 SHRS Innovation Seminar. Our speaker today is Michael Nilo. He's going to be talking with us about how to get your medical devices through the FDA. So Michael Nilo has over 13 years experience in the medical device industry, working with the FDA for industry and as a consultant. His background is in biomedical engineering, and he has hands-on familiarity with most functions and departments of a successful medical device company. He's provided consulting advice for verification and validation testing, quality systems, and regulatory submissions for different classes of medical devices. As a consultant, he has authored and submitted applications to the FDA for Class 2 and 3 medical devices and has extensive experience with Q submissions, clinical trial development for medical devices, quality system regulations, and all manner of FDA interactions. So he's going to have a lot to say today and is open to any questions that you might have. So with that, take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks everyone for joining today. I'm going to share my slides here real quick. I put together some slides, and how to get your device through the FDA is a much broader topic than we can do in an hour. So this is supposed to be an introduction, but please feel free to ask questions and stop me if something doesn't make sense. I have a tendency to get into government alphabet soup, so if I don't define an acronym or something like that, feel free to stop me and I will explain it. Alex gave a good introduction, but briefly, why am I in front of you talking? I am a biomedical engineer. I am a Pitt alumni. I also went to UAB for grad school. I was the director of undergraduate biomedical engineering capstone at Duquesne, which basically taught this process over a year through an innovation out to concept and hopefully connecting with the FDA. But I did work at FDA for 6 years, specifically started in dental devices, but mostly in cardiovascular devices. On the plumbing side, more stents, valves, balloons than pacing, but I did work some on those as well. I also have extensive experience in clinical trial policy and pediatric device policy. I worked at a company called Biotronic, which did similar products, both in Switzerland and Oregon. And I've been doing this consulting thing for the last 6 years. There's a couple of familiar faces on the call here that I've worked with as well. And if you need to get a hold of me after this presentation, I've included my email, and I will send the slides to Alex or to send out to everyone who registered as well. So I'm going to go through kind of what the FDA does, more specifically in medical devices, CDRH, which is the Center of Devices and Radiological Health, who the FDA reviewers are, who your audience is, how to classify your device, and a little bit of a recap, as much as we can get through. So just briefly, the FDA, it's the oldest comprehensive consumer protection government agency in the US. Their goal is to promote and protect the public health. It covers foods, drugs, biologics, cosmetics, animal and veterinary medicine, and tobacco. It's a huge agency within the government. And really their goal is to, especially within devices, is to force companies to demonstrate that their products are both safe and effective. So not only will they not hurt patients, but they are not snake oil. They're effective in what they say that they can do. So at that level, it's often a consumer protection. In consumer protection, it is often related to how you market your product. You need to prove to the FDA that you can do what you say you can do. So that's kind of an important note, because a lot of people miss that that's kind of their goal. So, like I said, they protect and promote the public health. They focus on drug, what we're going to focus on a little bit more is drugs, biologics, and medical devices. The food side of the FDA might as well be an entirely different agency compared to what we're talking about today. Drugs, devices, biologics, veterinary products operate under a much different window than the Center for Foods. So if you're interested in foods, there are plenty of people to talk to. It's just not me. You probably already know more than I do about that. They really focus on getting accurate science-based information to the public and forcing that to be, the burden of proof is on the companies, and they regulate the manufacturing, marketing, and distribution of all products. But recently, within the last 20, well, even less than that, last 15 years, I believe, tobacco products. That used to be under ATF, and now it's often under FDA. They have joint jurisdiction over that. And also interesting that you may not know, they also do a lot of work with counterterrorism products. So if you are, when I worked at the agency, there was things related to smallpox and anthrax. Recently, there's other counterterrorism efforts that go through FDA, and kind of technology that comes out of the Pittsburgh area related to that. So what doesn't the FDA do? They don't approve companies. You don't get FDA approval as a company, you get FDA approval as your product. They don't regulate the practice of medicine either. So they regulate what you as a company say your device can do. But if a doctor goes out there and uses it off label, or there's a fine line there, and we can, it's a bit of a dance. As long as you're not marketing your product to do something off label, doctors are free to use their devices as they see fit to, as part of their do no harm, but also help patients. They don't approve tobacco products. They actually, they regulate how they're marketed, no flavored, vaping and things like that. They don't approve cosmetics. There's kind of cosmetics that are out on there where they may regulate the testing methods, but there's no FDA approved makeup, for instance, or FDA cleared makeup. They don't approve medical foods or infant formula. This has been a recent kind of topic due to the infant formula shortage. They regulate some of the manufacturing process, but they don't actually approve the food itself or the safety of the food itself. They don't approve dietary supplements. Just look at the structure and function of them, and again, how they are marketed. That's kind of a big loophole, but you will see if you go into your local pharmacy or the grocery store, the entire vitamin row, none of those amounts or what's really in them have ever been reviewed by FDA, but what the extent of what they can say about their products has been. And lastly, they don't approve food labels. There are now more recently regulations on what needs to be on them, but they've never reviewed them. It's kind of a self-certification. We're going to briefly go through some of the statutory authority. This is a big slide, but the really key one I have bolded here for medical devices, which we're talking about today, is 1976 was the first time that the FDA started regulating medical devices, which is almost 50 years ago at this point. But really, if you think of the extent of medical devices, it's not that long ago. And they were the US was the first country to regulate them specifically. So there's been a lot of updates, and actually currently it's held up in Congress, but there is a new act for user fees that should hopefully get approved this month, or the FDA is going to be working without a contract. So you'll probably see it in the news coming up if something doesn't get approved here by October 1st. So within that first Medical Device Amendments Act of 1976, the FDA started saying that they set up the processes for classification of products based on risk. They added different processes to get approval or clearance by FDA. They established what good manufacturing practices are. And those, for those of you who are in this industry and have heard of quality system regulations, good manufacturing practices and quality systems are the same, kind of treated as the same thing. They set up a database for registration and listing. Basically, if you're selling a medical device, you need to tell the government and therefore the public that you're selling it and list it. They also set up a system of reporting of deaths and serious injuries. So if you are a medical device company and you're selling something, you are responsible, no matter what class it is, for reporting deaths and serious injuries related to your device. Keeping good reports and reporting that, transferring that reports to the government. They also set up a network of experts in the regulatory process, and they increased the FDA's enforcement authority on these things. That was kind of all came at the first in 1976 at the first part. And the ways that they regulate, are through three different things. laws which are enacted by Congress, and they're legally binding on FDA and industry. And to change the laws, often, those are slow moving. It's an act of Congress, literally, to change these things. Regulations are issued directly by the FDA, but they're subject to notice and comment. So there's specific regulations, and within medical devices, you'll find these regulations mostly within, and this is no reason to memorize this, but it's Code of Federal Regulations 21, parts 800 to 899. It's a very boring book of regulations that kind of are expanded upon in FDA under guidances. So you take the general kind of descriptions that are in the regulations, and then they expand upon what those mean and what the requirements are. And I made this slide probably right before COVID, to be honest. And the FDA has been extremely prolific over the last year and a half. And I think the number is now over 900 general and product specific guidances related to medical devices. But those guidances are recommendations. They're technically not binding, but they really do give the public the most current thinking, hopefully, that the FDA is. So while they're not binding, you should probably treat them as very close to binding unless you have a very good reason not to go with the guidance. And that's going to be product specific. So that's kind of the high level. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about CDRH, which is where you would be if you're a medical device, and kind of how it's organized within FDA. So this is a pretty complicated slide, but this is the entire FDA organization and every center that is kind of falls under it. And the Center for Devices and Radiological Health is just one part of it. Now it is one of the larger parts. I see the Center for Drugs and Drug Evaluation and Research, the pharmaceutical area, is the largest, but I believe Center for Devices is either second or third. So it's a bigger group. And their role is, like you might have guessed, evaluate the safety and effectiveness of medical devices before and after reaching market. So just kind of as a general statement, once you get on the market and you've gone through that pre-market review process, if required from FDA, you're not done with your requirements. You're going to be subject to audits. There will be further requirements as your product develops, you scale, you do design transfer. Your regulatory burden is not done once you get clearance or approval to sell your product. And the goal of it is to give patients and providers timely and continued access to the best medical treatment available. So we'll get into how does the FDA regulate. So within CDRH, there's over 1,700 people in the organization. I think about 1,100 of them are within this, or before things went remote, were based in White Oak, Maryland, which is right outside the DC metro area. And most of the people there, and that's kind of the people you'll talk to, you interact with, they're going to be scientists, engineers, clinicians, statisticians, veterinarians, also lawyers and policy professionals. There's a lot of communication, education, and training specialists at the FDA as well, and administrative staff. You'd be surprised at how much free education that the FDA does put out to be helpful. And there are people, it is not always the easiest process, but it is possible to communicate with the FDA today. You can call up Division of Industry and Consumer Education today and ask them a question, and they usually get back pretty quickly. So there's lots of ways to get through them as well. So since we're focusing kind of today on how to get your product on the market, within CDRH, there's lots of different offices, but the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality is the group that is most invested in pre-market review of your product. So you have to go through them to get on the market. And they're broken up into product areas. So there's 8 different groups within that office, and they're broken up into you can see them, I'm not going to read through here, but these are kind of important divisions. And what's interesting to note is this is the level where they start working as a group. So you may have something that goes through the cardiovascular group in OHT2 that is treated much differently than maybe something that goes through the orthopedic group in OHT6. Just the structure, the policies are supposed to be the same, but it's kind of, these are their own little groups, and they kind of act more singularly at this level. So just know that if you want to have a cardiovascular product, you should probably talk to someone with experience in that group. Whereas that might, if they don't have direct experience in vitro diagnostics, the responses, the way you interact could be very different. So it's good to know if you're developing a product and you're looking for advice and things like that, try to find someone with experience, at least in this office level. So within OPEQ, we're going to, the OPEQ core functions, this is where they implement those pre-market review programs, and we'll talk about what each of those means later. They also ensure product compliance after you're on the market. So that's kind of the registration, listing, recalls you may hear about, especially with Philips recently. It's been a big recall process. They also look at bio-research monitoring, which is clinical trial policy, making sure that you're accurate and keeping good records. And they really also help develop methodology and analysis and clinical trial infrastructure. So a lot of the new policies, especially related to digital health, come out of this office. In addition to that, they talk about some of the clinical laboratory improvements. CLIA is often, what that's stated as, and that's going to be related to in-hospital testing. A good, for, do you have strep throat? That test is kind of a clinical laboratory type test. They also, make sure that there's mammography quality program that's come out of, with the breast cancer. There's a special group that does that. They also regulate the radiation emitting of non-medical products. That was something I learned when I was at FDA. Your CD-ROM drive on your computer is technically regulated by, because it has a laser in it, is technically regulated at some level by FDA in this group. And lastly, they set the strategy and oversee device-specific clinical evidence and analysis and regulatory functions. So this is kind of like, if you have a device specific, there may be policy related to your device type already out there by FDA. So I'll take a quick break for questions. I kind of been flying through this to get to more of the meat. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to keep going then. So the FDA reviewers, kind of the people at FDA, and it's interesting to talk to, Pitt Organization, because we used to joke that FDA is Pitt Bioengineering Grad School. There's a lot of Pitt bioengineers within this group, but really what they're doing is reviewing. It's same group of people I talked about earlier, but they're really reviewing companies' test, descriptions, test reports, and analysis of their own specific devices, and determining based on that evidence whether or not device is fit to be on the market. And so it is often misunderstood, but the FDA, in a pre-market sense especially, is not going to come to your company and review everything you've ever done. And they also don't work for your company. So, and unlike other countries like throughout Europe and Britain, where you're paying an auditor to come visit you, and there's a little bit of a relationship because you're paying them to give an evaluation, they're independent. So it is on the company, as you start up, to be really good at communicating not only what your device is, why it's important, but how your test plan and what you've done in terms of evidence you've collected supports safety and effectiveness. And it's that part there that companies really sometimes miss, because it is not that no one can just read. If you just kind of do a data dump, you can't just do that. You have to tell the FDA why certain things matter and what they matter for. And so when going to the FDA, try to remember to have that framework. So reviewers at the FDA, me being former, wide variety of disciplines, but the lead reviewers are typically biomedical engineers. Or at this point, biomedical engineers or biologists. And what'll end up happening is your submission goes to the FDA, you get assigned a lead reviewer, and they put together a team within their group to review your stuff. So you're, depending on the level of risk or size of your file, you might have a lead reviewer, but also behind that person is a doctor, a statistician, a veterinarian that's used to reviewing animal studies, maybe a software expert, maybe a MRI expert, depending on what the device is and what needs to be there. Some of the, I think I put this together for undergraduate bioengineers, but it is a good job, especially fresh out of school, because you get to see all the new stuff. It is still working for the government, so there's flexible schedule and pay. And if you're someone that's interested in learning more about working for the FDA, feel free to follow up with me. So again, I'll just do a quick pause for questions. All right, gonna keep going, and kind of now we're getting into a little bit more of the different processes. So kind of I titled it classifying your device, but there's a little bit more to it underneath this. So we're focusing today on medical devices, but the first thing to kind of find out is, do you even have a medical device? And this has become a more important question as software and wearables and things like that have come out. And it's a really important question to answer first. So by definition, a medical device is an instrument, an apparatus, machine, implant, in vitro reagent, including a component, part, or accessory that diagnoses, cures, mitigates, treats, or prevents a disease or condition. It may affect a structure or function of the body, and it doesn't achieve its primary purpose as a drug or a biologic. And there are certain things that it excludes, software functions such as data storage, administrative support, and electronic patient records. And when we talk about kind of data storage and administrative support, that includes things like hospital management systems and display, kind of just transferring data from devices in an ICU to another computer. Those kind of things are not necessarily medical devices because they're not doing any of this part with the diagnosing, cures, mitigates, treats. Additionally, there are I think 2019, the FDA put out an important guidance document for those of you who are interested in the digital health space called the General Wellness Guidance. And FDA defined a lot of specific areas where either they don't believe those are medical devices anymore, they're just there to promote the general wellness of patients and not necessarily mitigate or treat or prevent a disease or specific disease or condition. Or there are things in there where they've defined, yes, this is a medical device, but we're going to look the other way. And that's something called enforcement discretion. And you should definitely, as you're developing your ideas and things like that, start here. Find out if you really have a medical device and if it is regulated. So this is kind of question one that you want to answer. Is there a question? I'm gonna keep going then. So one thing though that a lot of, especially kind of if you're coming out of a lab or something, that you may have something that's a combination product where it is a device, but it's also combined with a drug or a biologic. My specific example is always drug-eluting cardiovascular stents. These are stents that have a sirolimus coating on them or different kind of drug coating on to help make sure that the vasculature remodels in the correct way. And what the FDA does when you have a combination product is it starts in the Office of Combination Products, who facilitates the jurisdiction, because these things have to go to a primary center, whether it's devices, drugs, or biologics, to determine the timelines, the laws that you have, the regulations you have to follow, and things like that. So And the way that they determine that is through what's called the primary mode of action. So, and they kind of make a determination of this acts first as mechanical and secondarily as pharmaceutical, or vice versa. So in an instance of the drug-eluting cardiovascular stent, the stent itself, its primary function is to open up the lumen of a vessel, and the drug is just there secondarily to make sure it heals correctly. So drug-eluting stents are reviewed and regulated under device regulations primarily, and are still subject to some requirements of drugs, but that's secondary. And this can kind of goes back and forth depending on the device area, what the drugs are, and what you're trying to say about the device. It's important to know how you're marketing your device as well, or product as well.
Michael, we had a question from the audience. So one question that came up and often comes up a lot, especially in people developing devices in undergrad or graduate school, is an app or something on your phone that makes suggestions on how to take care of a patient condition that is used by a patient or really does anything else. Is that regulated? Is that a device? That's a good one, isn't it?
It's a great one. And I will start with the great regulatory answer of it depends. But it really does. It really matters how you market your device, or your app. So for instance, there are diabetes management software apps that are regulated by the FDA because certain ones tell patient when to take their insulin and how much to take. So they're directing specific medical treatment. However, there are other diabetes management software that just encourage patients to get up and move, exercise, help them track their glucose intake, through carbohydrates and things like that, and help manage their condition without directing their specific healthcare. And those are considered not regulated by the FDA. And it is I would say that is one of the most difficult current questions to answer. And you really should, that kind of goes back to that general wellness one, which is targeted at those apps. The one you can always ask FDA, especially that Division of Industry and Consumer Education. I will say that as a former reviewer too, the FDA is a hammer, especially if you ask the review divisions. The FDA is a hammer and everything looks like a nail. So if you ask someone, hey, if you ask a regulator, hey, do you regulate this? They aren't aware of what they already don't regulate. So my suggestion, if you have something that's borderline, is to really do your best to make your own determination and then check that with someone else, or look at how other companies in the field operate as well. So there is no overarching answer there, unfortunately, but hopefully that helps a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Cool. So keeping going here. So device, yes. Keep paying attention. No. If you're not a device, honestly, there are a lot of really good regulatory consultant type people for drugs and biologics. And I can answer I know enough to be dangerous, but really I'm not the expert in this. We're focusing on medical devices today. And like I said, maybe in the case of the apps, keep paying attention. We'll kind of go through some stuff. So once you've determined you have a medical device, there are 3 classifications of medical devices at FDA. And it's 1, 2, and 3, and they're based on the risk level of the device itself. Class 1 is the lowest level, and this is about 45% of devices that are on the market. They're not life-supporting or sustaining, and most of these ones do not require a pre-market review process. You actually can certify that you are doing the right kind of record keeping. You're going to report your adverse events, and you have a good manufacturing practices set up and established. So you have a quality system. And then you can just kind of tell the government that you can register and tell the government you're doing that, and you've self-certified that you're doing this. You'll be subject to audit eventually, but you can go ahead and sell the next day. And these types of devices are tongue depressors, stethoscopes, dental floss, examination gloves, non-prescription sunglasses that have UV protection on them. And there's lots of other ones that actually go a little bit more risky, and you'd be surprised at how much is class 1 getting through them. Class 2 products is actually where the majority of products are. I think it's like 55% now of devices are in this. And the way to get these devices are subject to pre-market review. And there's kind of 2 ways for pre-market review here. Most of them require what's called a 510K. And we'll get into the specifics of this, but 510K is literally called that because it's the regulation 510 Part K. They're not super creative at the government. And then some of them require what's called a de novo. And these types of devices, these are kind of medium risks, and they are things like ECGs, dental cements, dental implants, knee implants are in this one, X-ray systems, fetal cardiac monitors, and thousands of more examples there. And then the last one is class 3 products, which are the highest risk products. And those are going to be the most technologically innovative, the life supporting, life sustaining, and they require what's called a PMA, which is a pre-market authorization. And these are typically going to be implantable cardiovascular neurology type things that could be life threatening if it's not done correctly. So you got pacemakers, stents, defibrillators, pumps, deep brain stimulation devices, these kind of things. So we're going to go into the requirements for each of these briefly here. So class 1 devices, like I said, you're only really subject to the general controls, and it's a little bit more of a self-certification process. You're generally exempt from pre-market review, and yeah, like I said, general controls mostly apply. So this is like adequate labeling, and this is stuff that would show up. The only way the FDA sees this is when they show up to audit you and check what check your records, or if you have a competitor on the market that says, hey, this company is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, go check them out. And a lot of class 1 products are regulated within the market themselves and kind of highlighted for FDA authority. So those general controls that I keep mentioning relate to the labeling, the reporting. Did you register and list your product with the FDA? Did you tell them that you are going to sell this? Do you have a quality system, those good manufacturing practices? And the adulteration and misbranding is kind of how are you marketing this product? Are you marketing it while it may be listed for something simple like tongue depression? Are you marketing it for something more risky than that? Are you going beyond what you're actually allowed to say within how you listed the product? And that gets into adulteration and misbranding. Another way that's common for adulteration is taking someone else's product and selling it to do something else that it's not approved to do, or that they aren't approving it to do, listing it without their permission. So class 2 devices, which is probably where, if you have a technology, this is probably where you're at. So with class 2 devices, you're still going to be required to follow all those general controls, but then there's going to be special controls needed to provide assurance of safety and effectiveness. And where you can kind of find these special controls are often in industry standards. For instance, if you have like an electronic device, 6060, the 6060, ISO 60601 series of testing is all related to medical safety of electronic products. There's also product-specific FDA guidances. I mentioned fetal cardiac monitors earlier. There's a whole guidance that specifies exactly what you're supposed to do to get a fetal cardiac monitor on the market. So these are kind of what's called special controls. They go beyond those labeling and things like that. It's the testing that you need to do to show. Most devices in this area are subject to what's called a 510K, as I mentioned. And the goal of a 510K, and I will talk a little bit more about it later, is to demonstrate what's called substantial equivalence. to another product that's out on the market. So class 2 devices aren't subject to like necessarily, it's rare that a full clinical trial might be needed. The goal here is to say, hey, we're close enough to something that's already established on the market that we can demonstrate through some tests, we can demonstrate substantial equivalence to that product through testing and things like that, that, hey, we're going to perform just as well, or we're technologically the same, and get clearance to the market. So if you ever see something on the market that says FDA cleared, that means that they have gone through and they're class 2 and they've demonstrated through 510K. They are cleared to market. And it's different than approval. It's a little regulatory nonsense, but class 3 products, which we're about to talk about in a second, are approved by FDA. There's full review. The FDA has approved that they're safe and effective. Class 2 products are cleared that they are substantially equivalent to something else on the market, if it's 510K. Now, the other way, and this is coming up more and more, especially with software, is de novo. And de novo products is, hey, we agree, the FDA is going, hey, we agree this is just a moderate risk device. It's not high risk like a PMA. But we also are saying that there's nothing out there in the world that you can say you're substantially equivalent to. So de novo is often kind of considered PMA light, in that you're still really establishing safety and a reasonable expectation of effectiveness, I think is the actual term, but it's more based on you have to collect enough evidence to support your device on its own, as opposed to comparing it to something else. It's a little nuanced, but it ends up changing the costs and timelines of your project. A de novo basically doubles the time that a 510K would take, and it's about 5 times as expensive in terms of regulatory costs. For those of you who are kind of doing this right now and you think you may have a 510K product, a traditional 510K is 90 days of FDA review. Those are calendar days. And the way that works is you submit, the FDA will take about 60 days to review everything you've submitted, and then they'll hit the pause button on the clock, and it's kind of like speed chess. They'll send you a list of all the deficiencies and questions they want you to answer. And once you feel that you've answered all of them, you send them back all the answers, and they start their clock again, and they have a total of 90 days. So typical 510K reviews are actually closer to total time, or closer to 120 to 150 days. So if you are close to having a 510K product right now, and you're like, hey, how long can we estimate? I would generally say 4 to 5 months. De novos, I would say closer to 8 to 9. And a PMA, which we're about to talk about, is closer to a year, especially for innovative technology. So class 3 devices, this is the PMAs. You're still doing all the general controls, all the special controls that are related, but in totality, the FDA is saying that's insufficient to assure safety and effectiveness. So you're going to need a clinical trial, is essentially what this means. So this kind of comes, if it's life-sustaining or supporting, if there's technology with very new questions of safety and effectiveness, and some of the good ones are, spinal cord stimulators, artificial heart. And like I said, it's a 180-day review, but most of the time, because these are complicated questions, it ends up taking closer to 10 to 12 months for a non-panel. And then for what's called panel track, and you guys may have seen some of these come out in the public often, where there's brand new technology, the FDA will put together a panel of experts to weigh in on the evidence. So it's not just the regulators, they'll get a panel of 15 or so physicians, statisticians to also weigh in and give opinion. And that also increases the timeline of these things. That's really specific to really new innovative technologies, the first of their kind, high risk type things. FDA doesn't always do panel tracks if they can avoid them. The other time where there's going to be panels is if there's some public policy pressure. So it's still a government organization. If the senators from New Jersey, Minnesota, Utah tend to be the ones that knock on the FDA's door. Often, if there's a little bit more public pressure, there's more likely to be a panel. So a little recap of what I've kind of flown through here is FDA is a public health organization. CDRH has lots of roles, including the pre-market review and the maintenance of post-market compliance. The reviewers are usually engineers, scientists like you. One thing I didn't mention is the reviewers have not often worked in industry before. So there's often a knowledge gap there of what the effect of their questioning may have on your company. Don't hesitate to tell them that because there is a little bit of give and take when you discuss things with the FDA. And especially there's been a lot of turnover through COVID and things like that, and the knowledge base may not be there that you think should be there. So don't hesitate, be nice about it. You're going to establish a relationship here with them, so try not to be a jerk, but there is some things you may have to catch them up on. FDA, this is often a surprise to people. FDA does not test your device. You're responsible for presenting that evidence to them. And the evidence, controls, and regulations are determined by how your device is classified. So the class, regulation, and product code. And we're going to jump into that next. So, and then, how do people usually mess this up? We kind of talked about this before, but poorly defined indications, doing a bad job of defining exactly what you're saying the device can do and who it should be used with. Be specific there. Another one where people mess up is overstating what the product does. The marketing team gets in there, they get excited, you're passionate about your product, but remember that anything you say that your product does, you're going to have to prove that it does that. Otherwise, you're not supporting the effectiveness part of that safety and efficacy. So any claim requires data. So don't overstate what you want to say. And often this is a phased approach. Start with what's simple and then add on with more data later. Risk management, which we probably won't really get into deep today, but a risk management plan and a risk management approach is really important for device companies to set up fairly early. The FDA bases, especially for novel products where there is an established set of controls to work, the FDA relies on companies, on you as a company, to define where those risks are and how best to mitigate those risks. So the better you can do that and the clearer you can describe that, the better off you'll be. The next one is what's called design control evidence. And this is probably detailed the subject for another day, but really this is kind of similar to the risk management. Defining what your user needs and device specifications are and how the best way to test to prove that they work. Again, the FDA doesn't work for your company, and most of the time it's different than pharmaceuticals where each device is very unique. So setting that up and really having a good definition to present to the FDA is important. And then showing your work. And this is kind of the, coming out of engineering, state your assumptions, define the problem, draw the diagram, all that stuff that you're supposed to do before you actually start doing the calculations. Make sure that that's really set up. And so you're showing your work through the FDA and why things matter. So, any questions in the room yet? Otherwise, we'll jump to the next.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You talked about class 1 and class 2 devices. Are devices, I have a specific question about interfacing with a class 2 device. If I have some software running on a computer that interfaces with a class 2 device, which has approval, how should I think about that? Does that automatically render me a class 2 device? Or if I'm non-invasive, is there a possibility I might be class 1 as well?
That's a really good question. Most of the time, the software that interfaces with a device itself, with a class 2 device, will take on the regulation of the device it's interfacing with. So most likely you'd be class 2. If it's especially important to know though, if it's a one-way or a two-way relationship. So if you are interfacing but only receiving information from that device, there's a chance that you could be regulated below or not regulated as a medical device at all. So
I see.
on a general note, I would say most likely you are class 2 if you're interfacing with a class 2 device, but there are exceptions to that rule.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay. So going through the kind of getting the product on the market here, it's important to always, we've talked a little bit about this already, so I'm going to go through, is describing the medical device. Make sure you establish your product correctly. What is your device is describing the medical device and being specific about it. Again, the FDA won't be working for your company, so knowing what your device really is, and then describing the purpose. What is it? What are you going to say it's going to do? What's the intended use? What are the indications for use? What's the duration for of use? Who's your target patient population and target users as well? It's not on here, but like, is this going to be used at home by the patient, or is it going to be used by healthcare professionals? Things like that to make sure are known and defined and spelled out. The next step after that is going to be identifying the classification and regulatory pathway. So identify regulatory classification. Are you 1, 2, or 3? So, and then executing based on that. I'm going to kind of skip through a couple of things here, but after you've established the regulatory pathway, you're going to want to make sure that you have those design controls, which are design inputs and user needs, and then verification and validation. Verification is making sure, proving that you built what you were trying to build. So defining what you're trying to build and then proving that you did it. And then validation is actually you build the right device. Did you demonstrate that your product fulfills your user needs? It's effective in doing what you want it to do. So you can often have you can prove that you built what you were trying to build, but you also have to prove that what you were trying to build was the right idea. So, and this is kind of valid scientific evidence includes plans to mitigate those risks. And typically and this is kind of for class 2 and class 3 products, especially, the type of evidence is going to be related to biocompatibility, chemical characterization, sterilization of your device if it's sterile. Packaging is a big one that people miss all the time. You have to package and ship your product and ensure that it arrives at the location correctly. Bench performance testing, if that's applicable. Software validation, if it's there. Usability testing is a big one that the FDA has really been harping on because people have gotten good at building devices, but they are getting bad at proving that the actual users can use them correctly. And user error is always the #1 cause for malfunctions. So kind of proving usability testing is a big one. And then some of these other ones, if depending on the risk of the product, may or may not be necessary. Animal testing, cadavers, clinical trials, and for those combination products that have a drug interaction, pharmacokinetics as well. We talked about the requirements for the regulations already. Let's skip that. These are some of the guidance and international standards. Get that. And so once you've kind of got all of it together, each type of submission has its own set of processes, timelines, evidence burden, things like that. So what I wanted to make sure we got to today, I'm gonna run through this, is some classification determination methods. I will send out the slides that go through all 3 of these, but I'm gonna walk through just one way to do this right away. So how to search for an appropriate product classification is an example would be a traction device, just treated low back pain through intermittent and static traction. Just pick that one because there's some OHP people on here as well. So there's FDA databases for product classification, 510Ks, PMAs, where you can search kind of summaries of everything that's available. And there's actually some subscription databases that make this easier, but this is the free way to do it. Go into product classification using the link there. Type in a general term. Traction is a good one for what we're talking about. And I would, again, conduct multiple searches, kind of make sure you've scoped the whole thing that you could be. Back pain might be another one. But within traction, you've got a whole list of different items here. And, depending on what yours are you have a couple of different devices, you know, apparatus traction non-powered and equipment traction powered. For this example, we're saying it's a powered traction device. It doesn't have to be, but this is the one we're going to click into. And so when you click that link there, you'll see product code ITH. So within the FDA, they try to make it easier for products to be grouped within different product codes. These are 3-letter codes that have nothing, the letters have nothing to do with the product itself, so don't ever get into that. But they're grouped together and they help define products that fit in that bucket. They'll be defined as to what types of submissions required. So you'll see here, ITH is for equipment traction powered. It's regulated under a specific regulation. Every regulation, well, regulations often have more than one product code that could differ because the regulations are more general and then product codes break it down to another level. And so that regulation, you know, consists of power devices intended for medical purposes with traction accessories such as belts and harnesses. This is exactly what we're looking at here. So then on this page as well, you'll see device class 2 that we determine the risk classification and the submission type. This type of device would require a 510K. If you're making one of these, there's already ones that exist out there that are similar, and you should be looking at that 510K pathway. And so again, for 510Ks, you're going to be demonstrating substantial equivalence to that product. And I threw in a bunch of links here that'll again get sent out for those different databases in different ways. And I will also I'll unhide a bunch of the slides so that you can kind of see some of the examples of different ways to look up your product classification. The one that is not in the examples that I often find helpful as well is just Google whatever your product is and type FDA after it and see if there's similar products on the market or if the FDA has put out guidance for that type of product. It often leads you back to these databases, but then you might pick up terms and better search parameters for looking through the databases. How much time? We still got a couple minutes here. Is there any questions at this point? Okay, we got about 5 minutes remaining. I'm gonna quick run through some of the submission types, just as an overview so you know what the abbreviations mean if you're talking with investors or planning the next steps. So first one I'm gonna talk about is investigational device exemption. And so what this investigational device exemption basically allows companies to be exempt from a lot of regulations in order to conduct a clinical trial. So if you need a clinical trial, on what's called a significant risk device, you are going to need an IDE approval from FDA. It's permission to kind of distribute your device to different hospitals and test it out on patients. Non-significant risk devices don't necessarily need, well, they will need what's called IRB, which is Institutional Review Board approval. So Pitt has a IRB. That IRB can approve the clinical trial for non-significant risk devices. And so the idea here is to make sure that you aren't out there just willy-nilly testing medical devices on patients. There needs to be an approved protocol, a systematic approach of data collection, consenting the patients, reporting and tracking adverse events and data so that it should support a future market approval and isn't just a mad scientist approach of seeing what might work. The next one we've talked about, 510K. Substantial equivalence is the kind of the bar of evidence here, and it's comparing really the intended uses, the device features, and performance testing between two devices, one that's already been cleared and the new one that will demonstrate substantial equivalence to be cleared. Again, we've talked about this one briefly, but de novos is a bigger submission. It's got no existing classification regulation. It's for novel devices, but typically of that low to moderate risk novel devices. A designation here creates a new classification regulation, and you are cleared to market with a de novo clearance. And it's a little bit of a reduced regulatory burden and controls based on the risk benefit profile device when compared to a PMA. Back in the day before this thing was around, anything that didn't have a predicate had to go through the PMA process directly instead of to establish and then be down classified afterwards. So, and then the PMA one is the highest risk devices. It is a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness, typically requiring a pre-market approval. The other thing that is required with the PMA is a pre-market audit of your quality system. For all the other ones, they don't require a pre-market audit. You just self-certify that you have one. For PMA, the FDA will come check out your facility to make sure that you have the correct quality system in place prior to your allowance to sell your product. And the last one are humanitarian device exemptions. This is an interesting one with a lot of different ins and outs that we can't get into today, but really if you have a really orphan type novel product that is going to be used on less than 8,000 individuals per year in the United States, so a lot of pediatric products fall into this one. There are different levels of evidence and kind of different ways to get through the FDA, and it's really demonstrating safety, and it's strongly based on a risk benefit profile on this one. So something to look into as well. I think that's all I have for today. There's some good resources that I'll keep at the end here when I send out these. So